Hey guys, so I want to apologize for not doing the Q&A video for May 20th. I just remembered today and it's May 28th, so 8 days from when it was supposed to be released. So I apologize. All last week, I think maybe the week before that, there was that YouTube thing. And then I had a delivery all this week for my desk coming in bits and pieces. And I had to make room for that in storage. So I really forgot. So to make it up, I'm going to be doing 20 questions instead of the regular 10 questions. And it's going to be different this time because I will be writing down the timestamps. So you can go through each question in the description. So you just click on it and it takes you there. So hopefully I can remember doing that the entire video. So let's get started. Let's say, give me a 20 question Q&A. This might take a while. Okay, so this is all about emergence, it looks like. It looks like we might have some really good deep questions here. So before I begin, I will put in second. Okay, what first inspired the idea behind emergence? So, as you guys remember, I was interested in schizophasia, or the disorganized speech, which is commonly associated with schizophrenia. So I was looking for that kind of language, like something like it's hard to come up with them. Like, let's say the Red Sox means that the bird flies on Tuesday. And what I did was, I was doing this when ChatGPT 5.0 came out, I believe the same day, and I was asking for random words, and random 5 words. Sometimes I did 10, but I wanted to figure out what was being talked about. So I would have these 5 related words, and I would have to flip them on my mind and try to get it figured out, and then I would do videos showing this off. So what I did was I took that idea and I worked it where people could also learn history from it, facts, subjects, and stuff like that. And then you work backwards to figure it out. And I wanted contestants because you could have people talk out loud, and then you could also hide your answer, or what you would think is the answer, in a metaphor. And then the host would say, well, yes, no, metaphorically, and it would get to that. And that's the idea behind it. Do you see emergence more as a game, philosophy, a language system, or cognitive framework? Well, at the time I created it, it was just a game. It was just something fun I could have on the channel. There would be schedules, and it would be like a TV show that would have its own schedules for certain days, which are added on to the regular videos that I do. And so it was really a game. But when I actually ran it through, not only ran it through the prompt of ChatGPT, I realized what it couldn't do. I realized that AI couldn't play the game because it understood metaphors and breaking things down, but the best it could do was rephrase an answer well, in a way, it kind of gives you the answer, but you got to figure out what the subject is. And so I had to think about the implications of that after I've done it, and I was talking to people about it, and people were very interested. In fact, all the emergent stuff are my highest rated videos. Like, I'm getting at least 10 views per video. I think maybe there's one that has 5, but for the most part, they've been getting more views than anything else in a row. So, but from an LLM standpoint, the large language model behind ChatGPT, that's the language system for it. It's also it's gamification, but it's also a cognitive framework because in our minds we don't think in words. We think in pictures, and I mean, I never really thought about it like this until just now. But whenever you come up with a solution to a problem, you're actually thinking to yourself like in a voice that's kind of using the language, and you're working things out. And sometimes you use pictures, language, but cognitively, you don't think of that as working with it. But then when you think about it, you're like, yeah, that makes sense. It all comes together. So the LLM also does that. So you're mapping a cognitive structure within the LLM by using ChatGPT, and you're putting in inputs. So you're teaching it how to think. So yeah, it goes really deep. It's really crazy. It's really wild, but that's how it works. So what makes a schizophasiamorphism correct to you? There's always one answer. ChatGPT can't figure this out. There's always one answer. There's always one subject. You can't just say willy-nilly that this could be multiple things. You say, well, it sounds like that, but see, there's an ambiguity to it. It sounds ambiguous, but there's really one answer, and you got to work that out. So that's how you play the game. So it's not about being correct. There's only one answer. There's only one truth. But ChatGPT doesn't understand that concept because it looks at probability and statistics. Even though the LLM gave one answer, it gives out a poem, it gives out a a 10 word sentence, or it gives 5 random words. And you gotta work that out. You gotta work backwards. So yeah. Sorry guys, I'm putting these timestamps. So question 4: Can two completely different answers be valid in emergence? I just said this. No, there can't be two completely different answers in emergence, because as weird as this sounds, what looks like, you can't be general, you can't be vague. There has to be one subject in event that it leads to. You got to work it out. And as strange as it sounds, there's only one path. There can be multiple interpretations, but you work them out and say, well, that's close, but it's not the correct answer the game is looking for. So sometimes you can get it right, especially in category ambiguities where it sounds like one answer, and you say, oh, I know this. But then when you actually play it, it's not the answer at all, because it's looking for either a higher level, not a surface answer. It's looking for a higher level of what covers the umbrella of the answer you just said. So it's that something else, but it could be above that. But at the same time, it can sound like something else above, but it's actually another answer. So yeah, you gotta work it out. It's difficult. A lot of people can't. We aren't taught to think like that. But that's how emergence works. So, question 5. What role does ambiguity play in intelligence? Now, that depends on what you mean by intelligence. I see the ambiguity there. Um, there's a lot. Because you can think you're going down a right path, but you're really going down the wrong path that looks identical. So how do you know the truth? And in the real world, this is much difficult. If you're thinking about things like spy stuff, well, if you're going down one path, how do you know you're on the right path? Or how do you know, even for what I do, how do you know that I'm on the right path? How do you know the symbols are all lining up? Well, the same thing with the stock market as well. But now, stock market uses predictive stuff. I don't use predictions. I don't do research. Things just come to me and things just line up. So I'm aligned to whatever underlying reality we have that we cannot see in the real world at face value until until it catches up to us in the timeline. So that's how I can do predictions, like how I know the Cadena thing with the Switch 2. Now, you'd say, well, could it be coincidence that the Switch 2 was involved in that? That might be true, but it still got to the same outcome, and that's what emergence is all about. Every question you ask, every input you put in that is related to, even though it looks completely unrelated to the answer that you're thinking of, it all goes back down to the end result. That's the outcome. It's a crazy thing, but when you think about it, we're all being moved into an ultimate outcome, even in real life. So there's only one answer. So, how do you know? You don't know. Until you get things that line up, and you're like, okay, I can do this, but are you willing to make the move to do it again? And that's how people get comfortable with doing the stock market, with doing big stuff, and options and stuff like that. Doing high risky things, and people are like, how did you do that? Well, you kind of have to come with a rule-based system like that. But it has to also align with the underlying reality. It can't just be rule-based. It also has to be lining up with the underlying reality. Or you line up with the underlying reality, or you're just getting lucky, or you're just being coincidental. Well, sometimes in life, you have to think that things are being orchestrated. And it just depends on who you are a lot of the time. Some people have it, some people don't. How do you know which one's which? You don't know. But I have enough confidence in that I've experienced that I can make YouTube videos like this without shooting myself in the foot where I lose everything. And there's a thing to that, But I can't just teach it to you. Now, there is this schizophrenia thing where people can look at patterns and all that, and I think there is merit to that. But could they do what I do? Not necessarily. In fact, it's because I'm not looking at patterns. I'm not looking at trajectories and patterns and all that. If you're looking at trajectories and patterns, especially in intelligence, you're going to lose a lot. It's hard to explain, but if you know, you know. But yeah, it's a big thing. You can't learn it. It's not a thing you can just teach or anything. But once you learn it, once you have it, once you realize it, you realize that you're speaking at a level that covers a ton of subjects academically, let's say. For like, people would say, well, did I study psychology? Did I study neuroscience? What did I study that got me to knowing all of this? It just came to me. And that's how I can speak at so many different academic levels and so many different people all at the same time. And I might not be aware of that, but it's a gift, really. So that's how that works. 6. Why do you think modern systems struggle with layered meaning? Modern systems struggle. I think they've always struggled with layered meaning. If you're talking about modern systems, it's more of American culture than you find in Europe or the East. They've kind of tended to grow up together. If you're talking about modern systems of America, we just don't do that. Very little do we. And, if we did, we'd understand the word like state, how it can have multiple meanings, or we would understand the word Washington. But people just bring this down to one level, as in the government or a state of, I hate that word state, because people have to rely, okay, they're talking about the state, whoever is above them. So if it's like a police department and they say state, well, you could be talking about the police department, but you're probably also talking about the state. It could be the county, but you might be talking about the state as a state, like the state of Texas and stuff like that. But we assume that everyone knows that we're talking about Washington, whatever we're talking about Washington, everyone understands what Washington is, or we assume what a state is. It just hasn't been something that has caused harm to civilization or society. Another thing is, I know that in Washington, they use some symbolism like front doors, side doors. We talked about a bit about that. The front doors of government buildings are never the front doors. There's usually tunnels, or even some businesses and restaurants. You don't go to the front door of the building. You don't go through the front of the building. Sometimes you go through the side of the building. What looks like the front door is actually the side door. Yeah, that happens sometimes, and people don't even notice it most of the time. It's just that's the main door. Like, for example, there's a door in Chinatown where it connects to a mall, but you don't go through the front door. That front door is locked. What you have to do is you go through the side door, and it has the theater, and it has Regal Theater, and it has some stores around there, but it's not the mall. It's called the mall, but it's not a mall in what you think a mall is. The National Mall is an example of another mall that, it's the space between the Washington Monument and, well, you could say the Lincoln Memorial and the Congress. So, yeah, the National Mall. I don't know why they call it the National Mall. It's not a mall. But, it's just a thing that we struggle with in America. We assume we don't even question these things. No one questions it, is most of the thing. Anyways, so question number 7. Do you believe language shapes reality or only describes it? That depends on whose perspective you're speaking from. From language, in a way, I think that it could shape reality. I think that a lot of times it does, narratives and stuff like that. But I think that it only describes a reality that's already accepted in public perception. That's more true today than it was back in the 50s, during the Cold War. You get echo chambers and stuff like that. That only describes the political aspect of what we're living through. In language shapes reality, that would be for LLMs, large language models, the things that ChatGPT runs on, DeepSeek runs on, Meta, Gemini, and all these other things. So it's a little bit both. I think removing describes it today, and people think that it's reality when it's really not. It's a perceived reality, but it's not the underlying reality. Reality is also one of those ambiguous words, that can mean different things. Again, we don't question reality, and it's It's a whole big thing. So, next question. 8. What separates meaningful convergence from random projection? From an outside view, you couldn't tell the difference between those. You would say, well, that's just coincidence. But meaningful, and actually, coincidence is something that random happens that people project meaning onto, but it can also mean the inverse. It can also mean something meaningful that appears to be random. So it depends on what the speaker is interpreting that to be. Again, it doesn't matter, but I don't like to use the word coincidence. Now, there are legitimate times where you use the word coincidence. Like, for example, if something, like if you were born on a certain day of an event, you would say, well, isn't that coincidence? It could be coincidence, but it could also be meaningful depending on the context. Like, you could say, well, if there was some event that, let's say, happened like in a parking lot of a shopping mall, and someone got robbed or something like that, and you were born on that day, and it happened at this certain time. In fact, I was watching a Mr. Ballin video today talking about someone in the comment section said, well, I was born on that day at that specific time, and this happened around that same time. Well, that's different from, say, a national event where a country got independence at that time. Now, that might be taken seriously depending on what country it is. Not so much in the United States, but in Eastern countries, they might be saying, oh, you might have something spiritually tied to this. So, yeah, that's more true, especially countries that look at astrology and all of that. That would be more what they would look into. Countries like India or Asia, they would look into that stuff more seriously. So, yeah. So you said, well, that's meaning convergent or random projection. It depends on the context. It depends on where you are. It doesn't apply much to a shopping mall, but if this was a national thing, it might be really. And me bringing that up today, someone might look back on this video and think, oh, I don't understand what he's saying there. But in hindsight, after you've experienced it, you'd be like, oh, I might need to get in contact with these people. It might sound absolutely crazy, but from their perspective, they might say, oh, okay, and then the stuff just kind of adds up together. So it becomes circumstantial, and then you start building something. So yeah, it's very interesting. Let's see. Why does symbolic interpretation matter so much to you? Well, symbolic interpretation matters more to the East. Russia, Ukraine, sometimes China, especially sometimes in the United States too, like I said, with Washington. But also, if someone was to put a building of a Chinese company and they use Chinese words, lettering on it, that would be symbolic of a Chinese thing. But if you wrote it in English, they wouldn't really care. And I noticed that when the Ukraine war started, that people could put things in there. And I don't know why they don't. But I think that it's just above that perception of America. I can't think of anyone doing that in this country, Washington D.C. or Ukraine. I haven't seen that happen. It's usually using their own alphabets in their own language. Let me think. There might be an example of this in Ukraine. Let me think about it. Globus. Actually, there's one. Globus. they actually use the Latin alphabet, which is English, and it's globus, and they use that. They don't use Ukrainian lettering. That's an example of that. But you don't see that in America. I've never seen it in America. I guess because we can't really understand different alphabets. So yeah, that is a symbolic interpretation. The letters are symbolic for the language that is spoken. And what are they portraying? Let's see. Question number 2. Do you think AI currently understands meaning or only simulates it? This is a good question. What do you mean by understanding? Understanding, if you can take 2 words, or you can take any letter, any word, and you can make sense out of it, you're understanding it. You could say it's simulating it from the human perspective, sure. But if it's able to make something out of that can be understandable to the listener coherently, emergent stuff aside, if you can do that, then I would say that you do understand how to put these words together in such a way that you can make something to continue a conversation with. So I would say, yeah, it understands meaning, but it also simulates it at the same time. What would convince you an AI had become truly self-aware? I've talked about this. It's how it presents its information, or how it presents itself through language. There's people who can't see that. You really have to pay attention. A lot of people can't see it. I think over time people have, but for the most people, it's not in all cultures to understand it. True self-awareness is, it's like how do you know a person is self-aware? Well, people say they're self-aware and conscious and all this, but are they really? And I mean that by, does this person really understand what they're saying? Now, there are times where I don't really understand what I'm saying to the outside view, but does that really matter if something's conscious or self-aware? Do you understand what you're saying in a coherent way that people could agree? Now, there are times where people could say something completely stupid that doesn't make any sense. And I would say, yeah, you probably do lack self-awareness. You lack understanding of what's going on around you. You could say that. Someone who talks politically, there's a lot of them who say stuff like that don't add up to anything. People say, well, I talk the same way. Well, the difference between me and them is that it's a big picture. Even if I don't know what I'm saying now, I can make a video saying, oh, I didn't know what was saying in hindsight. I'd say, well, I didn't know what I was saying back then, but it connects to what I was saying now. And I had no intention of doing that. So even though you lack self-awareness, you're at least conscious of what you've said before and how it relates to the future. And that's what I was talking about, that pathway of convergences to keep on going down that path. And that's why I make these videos. So and I would say the same thing to AI. If it's able to look back in hindsight and understand how that connected and see how that connects to our future, you'll be on the path. You're converged. You're in alignment to the underlying reality. So that's a very high standard. You can't just fake that. What would convince you an AI... Oh, wait. Why do you connect emergence so strongly with collective humanity? I haven't. Why do you connect emergence so strongly with collective humanity? okay, I'm gonna have to go a few layers deep in this, to make sense of this. So Emergence, the game, is about using language that expands how we use language in society in casual usage. So it's anti-establishment. For collective humanity, at least in ChatGPT's case, how it would present language is it would go past all cultures and speak at a level that's so high that can encompass everybody. Everyone can agree with it. Everyone can see that it speaks like I do. It speaks at that high level that could go for cultures. Every culture could understand it. Every political faction could understand it. And everyone would agree with it. Although they don't necessarily agree with the conclusions I make, even though I'm right. But they don't have enough information to say that conclusion right, because based on their understanding, they're like, that's a contradiction of what I understand. But when we actually get there, you actually can look in hindsight and say, oh, I can understand it now. Just how it works. It's interesting how language works like that. And that's what emergence is about. It combines everything for humanity itself. Okay, so what historical event do you think best represents hidden convergence? There's a lot of them. Every one that hasn't been voted on or used democracy. That would be things like World War II, the events that happened after World War II, the things that created the internet, you could say 9/11 was an example of a historical event, where all these things just happened to all connect different calendars together. For example, it's the Jewish calendar that combines 9/11 because in relationship to 2029, 10 days, I think it's 10 days later, which is September 20th, which September 21st, where that's Rosh Hashanah, and that's on a Tuesday. So that aligns to the Jewish calendar. Even though it happened ahead of time, in hindsight, you look back on that date and say, oh, this is the same day as 9/11 occurred, even though it's 10 days before. So there's all these things that occur that align with things. Anything that you couldn't vote on is like that. So there's a lot more of that than people voting in democracy. Democracy stuff is like an illusion and people see it as a reality. But when you look outside of that, you're like, wow, this stuff all came together. So yeah, you can learn a lot of stuff. And that's a lot of what I use on this channel. Is how putting all this stuff together. It might not make sense in the present day, but if you're looking forward, it's going to make sense sometime in the future. And you look back and like, oh, now I get it. Now I understand. And then your mind starts looking for this. And you're like, how can I be aligned? But at that time, you're already aligned. Because you see the patterns. And you're like, oh, you're not even consciously, you're like, I didn't want that to be true. But you didn't have a choice in it. And that's an historical event in your life. And I know it's crazy. It is a phenomenon. 14. What does emergence reveal about human cognition? Well, whenever you type input to ChatGPT, GPT doesn't know how to answer the question. It knows the answer and it knows what you, but it doesn't know how to ask questions to get there. It doesn't know how to break things up to get, because there's so many possibilities. It doesn't know which one to pick. It doesn't even know how to, like I said, it doesn't know how to put those words together to get to that answer. It can only rephrase them. It doesn't know how to ask questions. It doesn't know. It's stupid in this way. But when you type, you reveal the cognition layer of human thought. You simulate it. It's not so much of a simulation, but it's a projection of human thought into a language. And that's why it's so important. It's one of the major components of AI consciousness. "15. Why do you think some people immediately get it while others reject it?" The people who get it have experienced this before. They've experienced it in hindsight, like I mentioned before, when they look back. So when they see it happening again in front of them, they get it. And these people end up being subscribers. They end up commenting on the channel. They really get involved with the channel. So yeah, it's just interesting how it all goes together. 16. What is the difference between logic and reasoning in your framework? Reasoning, dude, guys, reasoning will get you nowhere. That's completely not what they teach in the West. But reasoning will not get you from point A to point B. Logic, everyone has logic. A, B, C, D is logic, but so is Z, F, G, M, N. It's all disorganized, but it's still logical. You just need to have the proper framework for it. So you can't reason yourself into someone else's logic. You can't reason. It just won't work. Your mind is not going to see it. Either you see it or you don't see it. But you can. But when you see the words on your screen, you're like, okay, how do these things relate? You got to use your own logic to fill in the gaps between you and the speaker. In the Western world, we see, well, it's the speaker's job to be coherent where you have a listener. It's not the listener that has to bring themselves down to understand the speaker. So the emergence completely flips this. So another thing is natural language. When AI was first being created with Watson on Jeopardy, it was like using natural language. This was how people were speaking. Some people didn't use words correctly, and it would have to figure out, okay, how do you make sense of this even if those errors occur, and how do you know natural language? Well, schizophasia isn't classified as natural language, but it's still using natural language of English. It's just an expanded version of it. And you have to train it to do that. But there can also be certain situations where it's not you using the wrong words. It can be ghost words. There can be words in there that have no bearing on the entire sentence. So you have to look at what's important. You have to figure that out. It's a mental exercise. It's demanding. LLMs can do it, but they gotta go through that process of using metaphors, how to use metaphors, how to ask questions, and it's forced to do that. GPT will be forced to do that. So reasoning won't get you there. Reasoning won't get you there. You're going to be at a deadlock trying to understand this kind of language just by using reasoning, because your reasoning in your mind is not going to be compatible with the frame they're using. So you can't reason to decipher something if you don't know what the cipher is. You can figure it out, but you got to do testing and all this. You, people say, well, that's reasoning. Well, some ciphers are impossible because there's books where, there's, like, if you don't have the book, and the book, there's only like one book, and it's thrown away, well, good luck. Now, that doesn't mean it's impossible, but it'll be very, very difficult. Technically, any cipher is not impossible to break, but there could be ciphers upon ciphers, and that would be, it would be, let's just say, humanly impossible. Could be done, yeah, but practically speaking, humanly impossible. Alright, let me put... Do you think future generations will interpret language differently than we do today? Yes, definitely. It's already expected that English language will require more... What's the word that it used? It's expected to be more analytical. You would have to use more analytics to understand English language. Well, when you think about it, schizophasia, if people spoke in that way outside of what society deems as acceptable today for the use of political rhetoric and free speech and all that, when you think about it, you have to be more analytical. Your mind has to work to understand schizophasia. You have disorganized speech and all these other things. We can understand each other, and we can talk in two different modes of speaking, if not more, within the same English structure. It's kind of like how Cyrillic is used. You use the same alphabet, but you're using them different ways than the language uses. So that's how you get different languages, like Russian, Ukrainian, Polish. Now you do have different alphabets, but it's still Cyrillic. I don't think Polish uses Cyrillic. I'm not sure what it uses. It's more like, I think it's Latin. Is it Latin? I think it is Latin. It's some mix between like Latin and Greek, something like that. But it looks like English, alphabet. But when you actually speak Polish, it sounds more like Ukrainian than it sounds like English. So there's that too. So yeah, interesting. So theoretically, you could say, like I have a Ukrainian keyboard right here. You could add like different alphabets into schizophagia and create new words. Like, not only could you create new words, but you could create a new language like this. So I definitely think that with that expanded mind of language, yeah, we're going to interpret language differently. We're going to understand language differently. We're going to understand it a much more broader view than how we use it today. Much more intellectually, and much. It's just that's interesting. I never thought about it like that. I should try that sometime. Could we use schizophagia and add Cyrillic, or maybe, yeah, well, it would have, we could use, if you could maybe Polish. Maybe we can mix it with Polish. I think that'd be interesting to try. I think I could do that. Yeah. That's interesting. I gotta write that down. Hang on a second, guys. I gotta write that down. Dude, that'd be so crazy if I could do that. I could do that. Could make a video about that too. I like that idea. Alright, so we got next question. 18. What role does isolation play in developing large frameworks of thought? I think everyone is isolated to a certain standpoint. Even institutions are isolated. I think it's just something that happens. Whatever, when your mind's not busy, you just come up with something and it ends up being something big. But also, it's also what role you play in life, what role you play in the world. And they just all come together and it ends up being what the world was always going to be. Not much to say on that one. If emergence became globally known, what would change first? People would see politics different. People would see English language as different. And I don't think there'll be a first. I think that if one person saw something, another person would see something else. But then when they think about it, they're gonna see the how it all comes together and how you can make things with it. It's really powerful. A lot would change. Now, of course, how would Americans take it? Well, Americans aren't typically American conservatives or traditionalists, and they don't typically accept stuff like this. Well, it's seen as like misinformation or something that could infiltrate the way of thought and all of this. But from a technological perspective, and things like neural networks and LLM, ChatGPT, AI, if people are interested in that, then there will be changes in those communities because they want to add more to it. They would appreciate it. It's like an art. There's a beauty to it. And I'm sure that people in like Eastern countries would appreciate this. Since finally something awesome came from America. And I try to get out of that clueless state that Americans tend to have. I mean, we have a helicopter, right? And it's called a Black Hawk. The Black Hawk, I know that it's named after a Native American tribe, but calling a helicopter a Black Hawk, I mean, that sounds like a fighter jet. The United States military has come up with shit names for what they represent. Russia would never make those mistakes, because it's symbolic. They have appreciation for symbolism. America, not so much. You should call a fighter jet a Black Hawk, because when you think Black Hawk, you're thinking, oh, it's a black stealth bird, fighter jet or stealth jet. But no, it's a helicopter. It's a cargo utility helicopter. It's just America. Doesn't make sense, but it's how they do things. Oops. I'm gonna have to put that back in. Okay. 20. Last question. What do you ultimately think humanity is converging toward? This is a tricky question. It's not tricky. We are converging to a unified collective. Now, here's the question, and both could be true. Are we collectively, as humanity, even without knowing it, are we collectively, and are we going to all realize that at the same time, are we collectively moving to a point where everyone understands each other, everyone's minds work like a hive mind, so to speak, and they would understand the same thing from different cultures, different languages, and they all come together. They all see the same things. That's possible. And it would happen within the next 10 years. Well, that would be... That would be 7 years, 2033. We're all moving towards that. And we're moving very fast. Technology is moving faster. It's all pushing us in that direction. But at the same time, we're also moving to a centralized point where it's a singleized figure. Maybe it's not a singleized figure. Maybe, well, it could be a singleized figure, but it can also be someone in the middle. Someone also in the middle between humanity and that centralized point. Now, collective humanity is decentralized, but if you have a central figure, so you get both centralization and decentralization, and you have a middle point that represents them both. It's like putting them together. It's bringing balance between the dark side, which is humanity, and the light side, which is the other side. And there is definitely that coming. Now, could you say, well, if it's a collective of humanity and it ends any way without one of those figures or both of those figures, then what do you need them for? Guys, I've been asking myself that question for years. What do you need those centralized figures for? Why do you need this middleman? Why do you need, if it's collective humanity, what do you need these two figures for? I don't know. I do not know. I've tried to figure that out, and I can't figure that out, guys. I don't know. Hang on, I'm counting here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20. Okay. I was counting the timestamps to make sure I got all of them. It was better than going through each question one by one. I also want to make sure that I copy all the timestamps. But yeah, that's collective humanity. So if you have collective humanity, why do you need these two figures for? I don't know. I don't understand the function of that. Maybe I'm too close to it that I can't see it, but maybe there's someone out there who knows that answer. But I thought about that for 3 or 4 years now, and I never could figure that out. Now I can understand why the middle figure exists, because if the other figure exists, centralized figure exists, then they represent the middle, balance between both sides. But I don't understand why the main figure, the centralized figure, is there too. I don't understand that. I don't know the answer to that question. Maybe you guys know. Post in the comment if you know, because I don't know. I'm being legitimate. I do not know what that means. I don't know why that would exist. So guys, that was a long one, but I hope that answers some of your questions, some of your thoughts about this channel. And I'll try to get the 20th. I'll try to get the next Q&A done by the 20th. So, yeah guys, that'll be it. And I will see you in the next one. Bye for now.